Hey, welcome everybody. What an amazing conversation we are planning to have today. Now it's April 1st, but this is not a joke, of course, today. We are going to be discussing a kind of serious topic, but one that, we were just chit-chatting. We're like, it's still very juicy, even if it's perhaps not a topic everybody wants to discuss. It's a really important topic to discuss how to create safe space, to discuss how, we're working through traumas in our relationships, and just how to be in a really good place during this isolation period where we're all seeming to go through different things in our relationships and different challenges are coming up. And I am just so excited. Melissa, thank you for coming on with us today. I'd love to hear a little bit about your background and what you do, and so that everyone else can know too.
Absolutely. I'm excited to be here. And I know this is a hard topic, but it's something that is so important. And I think so many people just don't have the proper confirmation around. And so I'm really excited to get into this. So my background is in integrative psychology. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist and a trauma specialist. So I train coaches and other mental health professionals in how to work with trauma in a mind, body, spirit way, because there's a lot of information out there about trauma that's just one-sided. It's like very medical model. And so what I know about healing my own trauma is that it's so important to not just look at trauma in the mind, not just look at trauma as a medical issue, but as there's also a very physical, somatic component that is present that we need to go in and work with when we are working with trauma. And what that means is an embodied sense of what has happened. And there's healing that has to happen in the body, because all of the research shows now that trauma is stored in the body. So when somebody says like, oh, just think positive, or just, focus on what's good in the relationship or in yourself, that doesn't work for people that have trauma that is stuck in them, because they would be thinking positive if they could, but they often can't. And so what's happening there is energy in the body that is stored from the trauma that has to be released in order for somebody to actually be able to think differently or to put themselves in a different mindset. And so it's really actually harmful for us to say to people, just think positive or only positive thoughts, because that's not possible for a lot of people. For most people, actually, it's not possible.
Yeah, wow, what a great point. Is you like that was such a huge discovery for me, even in my own journey. So I had complex PTSD since I was 4, and got to that point where I was doing all that mind work, like we had talked, hypnotherapy and spiritual work and all of that. And in fact, I got it to the point where I could actually focus my mind, but I would still feel it in my body. Like it would be so still. It was like my body and mind had started functioning separately almost. And that disconnect was so alarming. It was like, wow, what's going on? And it was that somatic work that really allowed me to totally clear out that PTSD fully.
Yeah.
So such an important point. Yeah.
And what happens when we do focus on the mindset only, and people can actually make a lot of headway with mindset work, but what happens is the core is still there. And so it will show up as a disease of some sort, even if it's not in relevance to the thing that you're working on specifically.
Totally.
So for instance, I've seen lots of highly successful people create incredible businesses by bypassing their trauma. So it's almost another way to disassociate, right?
Yeah.
You're smiling because I'm sure you've seen this too, right?
I'm like, us as humans are the most spectacular beings. We have so many ways to bypass, distract ourselves around things.
Yeah, and like disassociation is like, it's almost like ignorance is bliss, right? It's like we love to disassociate because who wants to feel into the hard stuff that needs to be felt into in order to really make a sustainable and holistic change in yourself? And so my business coach always laughs. She's like, God, you have the hardest thing to sell, you know? And like, we're still doing it somehow. It's like, come feel all your shit, please. Like, I promise it's not going to be painful, but it really is. You know what I mean?
It is, yeah.
I can't false sell myself and say like, it's not going to hurt, because it does hurt. Let's be real. Like, working through the depths of your trauma, it's not a joyride. And that's why we were talking a little before this, like, it's not so juicy or fun to like face your deepest wounds. And on the other side of it, it's the most juicy, fun freedom you can ever experience in your whole life. And so when people have that resistance, like, what I want to say is, on the other side is everything that you dream may be possible. It really is possible, but you have to go through the muck in order to get there.
Yeah, I love that you're saying that too, because that is like 100%, like, people are like, why would I want to do this? And it's like, if I could just like pop you into where you would be going, there's no way you wouldn't do it. Like, there's just so much expansion, so much freedom, as you're saying, so much joy, so much more capacity for life and living that, you know, and it's almost, I think, hard for people to imagine if they've been in that trauma for a long time, because they're so used to the way that they've been.
A million percent. A million percent. It's like, I remember sitting on my sofa, it was like, I don't know, 3 years ago, and going like, oh my God, I feel peace. Like, what is this? Am I okay? Like, it was like, what is this? Like, it was such a weird feeling, because I grew up in trauma and chaos, and I recreated that trauma and chaos. And then I did the work for so long before it actually, like, the clouds parted and I was able to like embody that peace. And then I'm like, am I okay? Am I okay? I need to look for something like, you know, like wrong. And it's like, no, like, that's not how it's supposed to be, actually. Like, this is peace, and peace is okay. And we feel safe when we're at peace. But when we have trauma, we've never felt safe before. And we don't even know that we're creating that chaos over and over again in our life, only because it's all that we know and all that we're used to, right?
Yeah, totally. Yes. Hello, Sarah. Yes, Sarah put us in touch, everyone. She says she loves that we are talking together. So yes, fabulous. Thank you, Sarah. I think that's just such an amazing point. Like, you know, that if people are watching this and they are listening to this and they can see a pattern of trauma and chaos and just that, like, that inner knowing that it doesn't need to be like this, even if you don't know what it can be like, or you don't really know what the real core problem is. I think if you have that feeling where you're like, something needs to change, or something needs to be different, or I know there's more, there's so much more. And, you know, I think it's really ever evolving when you start to open those doors. There's just more and more expansion that you can move into.
And it's like what you're saying. It's like, when we have trauma and chaos and all that kind of stuff that we're so used to, and you feel like there's something more, we often don't trust ourselves. We don't even trust that thought, because when we have trauma, our body literally stops functioning properly. Our nervous system is constantly scanning for threats. And so we don't trust. Like, I remember being in a situation for a long period of time, multiple times, friendships, relationships, and knowing inside, like, this doesn't feel good. But then I would override my own intuition, because I didn't know how to do it differently. And so I would make excuses, or I would, you know, tell myself like, oh, that's not true. Like, it's really okay. You know what I mean? And so if you feel inside at all an inkling of like, this isn't how it's supposed to be. I want more. I long for more. Like, really trust that in yourself. Like, hang on to that whisper that's coming from your soul and your heart, and really take hold of it and do what you need to do to get to the other side, because that whisper of something more being possible, it's right. It's telling you right. It's leading you right, but you've got to believe it.
Yeah, yeah, so true, right? It's like, yeah, because what you're talking about, like, I can relate to doing that in situations. Even as, I really started coming out of things, I would still then, interact with what might be an authority figure or something like this, or someone in a spiritual community, or a teacher that was, an expert. And then having that sense of like, ugh, like, this doesn't feel right. But then being like, well, no, like, everybody loves them, everybody trusts them, like, they're, like, it must be me, it's not them. And then when I actually followed that feeling, it turned out I wasn't the only person feeling that way. It wasn't just me. And it ended up being a huge opening for a lot of people. And maybe even that, person in that authoritarian, place as well. Because if you can really have a really empowered conversation sometimes with people, a really heartfelt conversation, people can see where, they maybe out of alignment, or they're reenacting their own traumas that they have not yet healed, because, we all have a lot going on.
1,000,000%. And I love that you brought specifically that trauma into the light, because that trauma, which is something that I have repeated that cycle too with spiritual teachers, coaches, people that I thought, it comes from the wounding of being invalidated as a child. And so you're repeating the pattern of this authority person that you're allowing to invalidate your feelings. And so what happens when we have trauma, we repeat the same issue in our relationships that we've had in our family of origin. And so if you were invalidated, if you didn't have a parent that was able to properly mirror you as a child, and this is how we get our sense of self as children. So we begin to trust ourselves when a parent is available to mirror us properly. And most parents honestly aren't. I'm just going to be real.
No,
in all of my experience, we have tons of transgenerational trauma. That means trauma that's passed on from generation to generation. So, like, if your grandparents were immigrants or alcoholics or whatever it is, like, and they weren't able to be emotionally available because they were stuck in their own trauma, that gets passed on through the generations until somebody says, nope, like you're saying nope, or I'm saying nope. But we end up recreating those situations where we're giving our power away, and we can't speak up because we're so scared, because we don't trust ourselves. And so healing trauma brings us back to absolute empowerment, where we begin to trust our intuition. We begin to trust our feelings, our felt sense, right?
Yeah.
And we're able to speak up in our truth. And in that place, we become so empowered. But besides the empowerment, we're able to create relationships that are so deep and authentic that have never been available to us before we worked on healing that trauma.
Totally. Totally. And I mean, I think even societal wise, what you're saying, that's true. I mean, I think we're coming into a place where now you've had enough generations with more tools and more insight and more awareness. And, yeah, sure, we're not all doing it perfect, because it's building. And, we're not, I mean, people become parents. There's no like beautiful little course that you're delivered with that says, here's how to work through your trauma, here's how to not pass it on to your children, here's how to do attachment style parenting, here's like, it's not there. So people are sort of just figuring their way out through their parenting and sort of moving through that. But I think every generation really does authentically try and do better than the last, right? And so I think even as a society, we're moving into a space now where we actually have more people that are really willing to move deeply into this work and allow themselves that freedom and allow their children that freedom and hopefully many future generations that freedom.
Yeah, and I mean, like, I know in my parents' generation, like, going to therapy was like super, there's a stigma around it. Like, you had to be really messed up, right? Like, to go to therapy. And I know, like, even growing up, like, I never wanted to go. I didn't want to be pulled out of class to see the counselor. I didn't want to go to therapy. I didn't want to be that messed up person. But now, personal development's like the cool kid thing to do, right? Like, you're actually cool if you're doing personal development. So that's great. Like, however that came into play. And I think this is recent. I mean, this is recent. The rise of personal development, the amount of coaches that you see online, the amount of people that are promoting the work, right, has become so big now that it's not a stigmatism to
Sure.
be, doing personal development, mental health, like, work on yourself. And so we are in this generation really shifting to doing the healing so that we don't pass the trauma on to our children. And I think a lot of us really want that. We want to end and break the cycle with us. And like I said, it's not easy to be that person to break the cycle, but even the small things, like I see with my kids, like how much they change as I change, it's not instantaneous and it's not overnight, but the functioning of our family is so much higher than the functioning of my family of origin.
Oh, right.
And just seeing that up leveling, even when my kids were little, like, I was doing this work, but it's like looking back and seeing the gradual progression of how far we've come and how close our relationships are and the way that we know how to communicate now and function as a family. It's just everything for me. It's everything, because I think that's, like, taking it out into the greater world and greater society. Like, we're breaking down as a society because of these underlying diseases that we have in ourselves, in our families. I mean, like, I'm looking at what's going on now with the whole coronavirus thing. It's like the disease has to come up into the collective, right? In order for us to say, okay, what are we doing here that's not okay? Right now, everybody's sitting home with their family and getting to take a deep look at their part, right?
like intense reality check, right? It's like you cannot escape it. Like if ththings aren't working with your kids, there's only so long you're going to be able to plug them into the TV right now. If you're not going to be able to ignore it.
Yeah.
It's going to be like, wow, there is something dysfunctional going on in my relationship with my kids. My kids are like, acting in this way, they're responding in this way, they're like I'm reacting. I've talked to so many moms who are like, oh my God, like I'm yelling at my kids. I'm yelling at them. And, and I didn't realize like how hard it is for me to deal with my children. And I don't know if, I've actually been, setting proper boundaries for them, because like, there's just seems to be no respect going on. And, you can't escape it right now. If you're in a marital relationship that's not working, I mean, it's going to be showing up huge. I mean, it's going to be like, here it is for you to deal with or not deal with. And it's, I don't know how people are going to be ignoring it if we keep getting isolated for, however many more weeks. I mean, there's going to have to be a point where people are like, wow, I need to do something about this.
Yeah, it's like time to sink or swim, really. Like, we're going to really see the breakdowns within our families and relationships now. There's no choice, like you're saying, to look at it, because you can only disassociate for so long, And what's going to happen, like, in my opinion, is whatever you're already doing, you're going to have that magnified. So if you use alcohol to check out, you'll be seeing yourself use a lot more alcohol to check out, right? If you are using TV to check out, if you're putting your kids in front of the TV. So like, here we have this huge opportunity to have magnified what it is that we really need to be working on in ourselves and our relationships. And we could either sit here and sulk, or take this time to really take a deep look at ourselves and contribute to the collective transformation that needs to happen for us to be a healthy, functional, sustainable society. Because if we're not sustainable and functioning in our own homes, how do we think that's playing out in the bigger picture,
Totally.
right?
I love that, because I'm always like, like people are like, what's like your like super like big dream, right? And it's like, well, freaking world peace would be fabulous, right? But I'm like, we can't. And people are like, why are you working on, so the microcosm? And I'm like, because it's a micro and a macrocosm. If we're not at peace in ourselves, we're not going to be at peace in our relationships. If we're not at peace in our relationships, we're not going to be full in our families. We're not going to be peaceful in our neighborhoods. We're not going to be peaceful in our cities. I mean, it just goes like, layer by layer by layer, exponentially out. And what we see with all this conflict in our world is really just a reflection of the conflict going on within ourselves and our relationships, Oh,
So true. It's so true. I always say, like, recycling and cleaning up the beach, like, that's great, but we need to save humanity. Like, we need to look at what's creating that behavior, right? Like, those are band-aids for a bigger problem that's going on inside of us. And like you're saying, we have to find that peace in ourselves, find that peace in our family, find how to work harmoniously as teams in the microcosm so that we can bring that out in the world, because we're far from that. We're far from that. And that's why there's war. That's why there's disaster. That's why there's disease. That's why there's so many breakups. That's why there's so many problems. And so we've got to look further than recycling and cleaning beaches. We need to go in. It's like Gandhi says, you've got to be the change. If we want to see peace, we got to look at where we're not in alignment with it in ourselves, and then in our small family, and then bring that out.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, even with the earth, like, I'm like, how are people going to be expected to take care of the earth if they can't take care of their own bodies, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're having relationship issues here, and you're, say, like, drinking lots or this, or doing drugs, or, eating like a lot of junk food, if you can't take care of just this right here, you're likely not going to have a lot of respect for the earth either. I mean, it's an outward reflection. Like, that's your home. This is your home. This is your home.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that people want to point fingers, or people want to say, it's this group, it's that group, it's her, it's him, but it's like, no, it's us. It's us. And if we all took personal responsibility and said, let me look at my part here, like, where am I still feeling hatred, or feeling, shame, or insecurity, or competition, or whatever that is, and working on healing that in ourselves, then we create that place of peace internally, and then we move from that place of peace in the world, and we spread peace instead of all those other things, right?
Totally. Wow. Yeah, I'm loving this. Thank you for coming on today. This is really beautiful. I mean, I love this. We've never met.
No.
Never met. And, and I'm just like, I was loving you. I was like, oh.
I love you too. This is awesome. It really is. And it's such a well-needed conversation. And I try to inspire people to heal trauma. And it's so hard for people to see that big picture,
Oh, I feel you. It's like, how do we do that? I know that is the thing, so while I'm just looking at the time, and it's, we're coming up almost into 1:30. It's went so quickly. What do you think is, like, sort of the best tip that you could give anybody that's watching this, that's maybe experiencing some of the things we've talked about in their home? What would be the one piece that you would want to give them?
Yeah, so I think the first piece is be honest with yourself. Sit down, notice how you feel. Like, really allow yourself to feel all the feelings that you feel. Stop, slow down, get present. Wow, I feel angry. I feel frustrated. I feel whatever it is, like, write it down, and then look at what's true for you in this moment, because awareness is the first part of change and transformation. So instead of overriding those things and checking out, get really honest with yourself about where you're at. I'd say that's step one. And then moving into the work, however that looks, there's so many ways to work on yourself, right? Like a bazillion. So that's a whole other topic, but just getting honest with yourself to see your part. That's step one.
Yeah, yeah, I feel you there. Yeah, it's so interesting because that's powerful work, and it's work that is often not talked about a lot. People want to talk about all the other solutions afterwards, but sometimes just moving deeply into our hearts and just really feeling what's going on just starts opening things, clearing things, allowing pathways to form, right? I always kind of say your heart knows the way.
Yeah.
And I think it's true. Like it's there. It knows when things are not right. It knows when there's something more. It knows when there's something just off, and it will feel painful, or it'll feel like grief, or it'll feel like anger, or it'll feel like resistance. It'll, it may feel like frustration. It might feel like a lot of different things, annoyance.
And it's okay to have those feelings. That's the thing. Like, we're not taught that those things are okay. So we eventually we instantaneously want to bypass them, right? Like, I don't want to look at that. That doesn't feel good. Look at it. Look at it.
Feelings are, like, I call them our compass. They're not good or bad. They're just simply a compass. It's like, here's what's happening, and we can choose how we follow those feelings, how we process those feelings, how we live into those feelings. And, we were talking about this, we're talking about families, just doing just what you're saying right now. Just setting that example for your kids, if you have kids in the house, is so powerful. Just showing them that they can be present with their feelings without judgment on that is just, that alone, if we taught every child in the world that, I think we would be shifting the world massively.
That's my dream. It's honestly my dream, because they spend 8 hours a day looking outside. Just like, how about 30 minutes of like, so what are you feeling today? What do you notice about yourself? We're totally set on looking outside instead of inside. And if we taught kids that, the world would change. Guaranteed.
It would change huge. Oh, thank you so much for being on this live with me today. It was such a pleasure. Really appreciate it. And I hope you have a wonderful continued isolation down there in San Diego.
Thank you. This was awesome. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you. Okay. Bye.